good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are. Difficult to know where to begin, but a little history may be worthwhile here. I was 27, 28 years ago, I was working at the World Bank as a transportation engineer, and I was 45 years old, and I suddenly realized that I was absolutely bored with my career. And I thought to myself, well, what have I been thinking about all my life? And I've been reading books on psychology and spirituality, and I thought, yeah, transformation. So the thought came to me that I should write a book. And so I decided to write a book called A Guide to Liberating Your Soul. And I spent 2 or 3 years doing that. And inside the World Bank, I changed jobs and I became values coordinator. That was to explore values in the World Bank. And after I'd finished the first book, I knew immediately what the next book was, which was called Liberating the Corporate Soul. And by that time, I'd invented a model called the 7 Levels model, which is now called the Barrett model, which is a 7 levels of consciousness model, so that you could actually measure, map people's consciousness and organizations. And that was my passport out of the World Bank 22 years ago to create my own company, which is now called Barrett Value Center. However, having spent 10 years as the CEO of that company, I began to realize that I was not just interested in values, I was very much interested in my soul, and even my first book had been about the soul. So I decided to work on deepening my connection to my soul, and at that point I began to receive a lot of messages from my soul, and I started writing. And I haven't written a book every year basically for the past 10 years. I've written 13 books, and all of these books are just basically information I download from my soul. And I can't stop it, it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's my connection to my soul. And so I ask everybody, do you have a soul or are you a soul? And most people will think, yeah, I have a soul. Yeah, I am a soul. Well, for me, I've moved from having a soul to being a soul. I live from soul consciousness, and that's a very different place to live from, as you will discover during this interview. So this model, the 7 levels model of consciousness and 7 stages of psychological development, is actually just an extension and expansion of Maslow's hierarchy. I expanded Maslow's idea, and I integrated it into ego and soul consciousness. Well, I think that's probably a really good place to start before we talk about the 7 stages of psychological development. And so you have to understand that we look like we're physical beings. Actually, we're energetic beings, and the energy field, or the aura that we have, is actually the energetic field of the soul. And the soul incarnates into a physical body pretty much at the time of the creation of the embryo, and the soul is an individuated aspect of that energy field, that universal energy field. Some people call it God. Call it what you like. I don't. I see it as there was a 13.8 billion years ago, there was a huge energetic bang, and somehow we arrived on the evolutionary scene from that big bang, and so we are energetic beings living our lives in 3-dimensional material awareness. And this 3-dimensional material awareness is a property of our senses. We can only sense a very limited number of frequencies of vibration. Like a dog, for example, can hear whistles, which we can't hear. And so we are this very limited vibrational frequencies. Actually, we have access to much more frequencies of vibration when we move into living from soul consciousness. So how do we link from where we are to this soul consciousness? Is through our feelings. Our feelings are energetic vibrations. And so your feelings tell you to what extent your ego is in alignment with your soul. Now, your ego was created by the soul at around 2 years old, because the soul could not stand the pain of separation that we feel in our three-dimensional material world. Because the soul comes from a higher dimension, a fourth dimensional energetic world, where there's just love, basically. I mean, an absolute sense of connectedness. And so what's been happening for 13.8 billion years is that consciousness has been evolving, and you and everybody on this call represent the advanced form of the evolution of consciousness. And when up to the point of Homo sapiens coming along, what happened was evolutionary adaptation, was on the one hand physical adaptation with different creatures, and on the other hand, consciousness. So some creatures live in larger habitats and therefore have a higher level of consciousness, for example, mammals. And we represent the pinnacle of that. And so all future evolution here on Earth is actually in the hands of human society, which brings us very, very, very interestingly into the present situation of COVID virus, because here is an amazing challenge for the evolution of human consciousness, because it actually gets us to think about who we are at a planetary level. And so our sense of identity has to expand because of this virus. It is actually inviting us to expand our sense of identity. And so the larger your sense of identity, the larger your level of consciousness. So that all sounded maybe a bit rambling, but it all links together. And so the soul is an individuated aspect of this universal energy field. You don't have a soul, you are a soul. And this journey in this three-dimensional material world is a journey of learning to grow and develop in consciousness. And when you die, you don't lose consciousness. You just become aware of a different plane of being. You move back to the plane of being where you came from. And so death is not a big deal when you know you're living the life of your soul. So when you take the fear of death away, life gets a little easier to support. And in fact, the whole deal about moving from ego into soul is all about letting go of fear, because fear keeps you isolated and separated, and it causes problems in your life. As you let go of your fears, you connect with other people, and you expand your sense of consciousness. So, wow, that was a long explanation. I'm sorry it took so long, but it gives you some ideas of what the soul is, and it comes here to learn how to connect, because in that fourth dimensional energetic field of love, because there is no fear, there's just love. So that, the soul can't learn about connection because it's totally connected, but it comes back into this world of separation in order to learn. So we're all on the journey, moving from fear to love and from separation to connection. Now, if you go to the Barrett Academy website, you'll find I do a lot of research on worldviews. And so I've been measuring the consciousness of nations. I've got data going back to 2014, 2016, 2018. And just today, I was reviewing the preliminary results of the 2019 data on consciousness by nation. So I've been able to rank nations by consciousness level. And all of that is available on the Barrett Academy website. Now, so I mentioned nations because they're kind of like the crucible of consciousness. So nations are at different stages of evolution. What do I mean by that? I mean, the average level of consciousness in a nation is reflected in its worldviews, and the worldviews pretty much follow the 7 stages of psychological development. Only there are 9 stages. I won't go into the detail there, but they're all linked together. So, for example, people living in the Nordic nations and New Zealand and 1 or 2 other countries are actually live in a worldview which is more advanced than the worldview of the United Kingdom, Belgium, Austria, which is more advanced than the worldview of the Catholic countries in Europe. And all of that is very clearly shown on the website where I've mapped consciousness. So why are these different? It's because the people in those countries are on average are operating from different levels of consciousness. Now not all of them are operating from the average level of consciousness of the nation or the particular worldview. There's a range, but the number of people operating from a higher worldview, shall we say, in a country that's like France, there is a higher number of people operating from a higher worldview in Sweden, and that shows up in the policies of the nations that I've been talking about, and that shows up in what I call my global consciousness indicator. So I have 17 indicators where I measure the consciousness of nations, and I can track how a nation is doing in terms of evolution of consciousness. I can track what are all of the different how they rank, which are the most conscious nations, etc. So it all comes back to where are you? Where are you in this evolutionary context as a soul? To what extent are you embracing fear? To what extent are you embracing love? Now, one more aspect is that many people live in authoritarian regimes, and other people live in democracies. And there are different levels of democracy. So the most advanced levels of democracy are found in the nations I mentioned, the Nordic nations and 1 or 2 others. And as you move down the scale of consciousness, you move more into authoritarian regimes. Now, it's very interesting. I'm bringing it back to the coronavirus now. Where your nation is at in terms of this evolution of consciousness, the leaders will deal with coronavirus in a different way. So in some nations, they'll be very authoritarian and they'll say, nobody goes out. And if you go out, and you're caught, you pay a fine. That's Italy. Now, Italy comes down, ranks number, 20 or 30 in terms of consciousness. Now, go to other nations. Well, they say, well, you're not allowed to go out. Okay, so some people, and they do that in an authoritarian way. Now, here in the UK, they've said, we really advise you not to go out. we do have powers to prevent it, but we really advise you not to do it. So they say it's like okay, they're making people more responsible and accountable. So these reflect different levels of consciousness of the leaders of nations, and the leaders of nations in democracies are all people who've been elected. So they represent the average level of consciousness of the people in the nation. So it all fits together very beautifully, and it's all so amusing to me to see what's happening and which countries are doing what. And then they're comparing countries and say, well, the UK is not doing this. Okay, well, the UK has a different approach because it's operating from a different level of consciousness. Whether it's the right approach or not, that's a different question. Mm-hmm. But it's the approach which is different because they're operating from a different level of consciousness. So let me try and give you some personal advice, okay? People, I was talking to, I have a young person who works with me, helps me with all my spreadsheets. She's 22 years old, and she's absolutely stressed out by coronavirus, global warming, etc., will she be alive? And she's absolutely stressed out by it. And I can understand that. I mean, when I was in my 20s, well, I was stressed out by the H bomb and the atom bomb. I mean, you know, in the 60s, that's what we were all talking about. That was the global threat, was Russia's got the bomb. Okay, and that was our stressor. Now it's a different stressor. So she said, well, how do you stay optimistic and so calm? Well, because living from soul consciousness, and I have no fears. Now, I say I have no fears. I mean, push me to the limit, maybe you'll find me have something. But I've worked on myself for so long, I've been able to eliminate most of the fears. Now, the biggest fear, of course, comes back to what I talked about earlier, which is the fear of death. And of course, coronavirus brings that up. Now, the interesting thing about humans is that whenever a situation changes, they always fear the worst. It's normal, it's natural. But why? Well, because we are, you know, we're the products of we're creatures that learned when we can't make meaning of a situation, we automatically go to the worst possible scenario because that's how we survived. That's how we survived on the savannah. That's how we survived as creatures in the evolutionary context. Our brains, our minds are absolutely programmed to survive. And so we automatically goes to the worst possible scenario. And of course, the newspapers pick that up and they love it because it sells copies. Fear sells copies. Panic. And then we get panic. So we got this huge panic over coronavirus, which is causing all sorts of amazing and unusual problems. And actually, it could result in a huge shift in once it's passed in how in consciousness in the world. And that's my hope. I hope it goes that way, not the other way. Anyhow, coming back to fear and personal. So for me, I have no fear of dying whatsoever. I know I'm going back to the love field. Here I am. I've evolved and I've grown and I've learned how to live in that field. And as I move into that field more further and deeper, I live without fear, and I live with contentment, and I live with messages from my soul which tell me what to do, which organize my life to the point where I have no needs. Well, what does that mean? It means that all my needs are provided before I even know I have them. And I've watched that evolve, and it's like absolutely amazing, because it's like your soul is able to organize your life at another level of existence and brings people into your life that can support you in your soul journey. And that's amazing to watch. And we call that, there is a word for that, and it's called synchronicity. Now, synchronicity is actually the working of the soul. Maybe you've had this experience of like, and they've been able to help you on your journey, or they're unconnected events with a common meaning. That's what Carl Jung called them. But actually, it's the soul working in the background with other souls. And, for me, it's like a daily occurrence. I just live in the field of synchronicity because my soul has taken charge of my life and I've let go. I've surrendered to my soul, and I live this fear-free life. I say 98% fear-free. Okay, I mean, if you're in a human body, there'll always be some fear. Your organization is all about this. You have mentors. I mean, that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking advantage of more experienced people. Now, normally we talk about mentoring in the field of work-related. Let's now talk about mentoring in the field of the evolution of your personal consciousness. That's what I do. That's my work, is mentoring for people to help them move through the stages of psychological development so that they can have fulfilling lives. Now, your mentors also do that, but they don't do it from the ego soul dynamic perspective. They do it from a more, well, it could be wisdom filled, but it's not overtly dealing with ego-soul dynamic problems. And when I say ego-soul dynamic problems, the ego has fears. The soul doesn't have fears. And so as you lessen the fears of the ego, then you move more into the field, energetic field of the soul, and you're able to deal with problems differently than when you're operating from fear. Because in fear, you deal with problems from point of view of separation. Oh, I'm going to fight, get this done. These people, I like Donald Trump, a perfect example. Donald Trump lives a fear-filled life. You know, he never got. So let me go into the stages of development, and I can relate that back to Donald Trump, but everybody will understand what I mean. So the first stage of development is like up to the age of 2, and you only have up to that point. The dominant brain is the reptilian mind brain. We have 3 brains and 4 minds. The first brain that develops is the reptilian mind brain. It's biologically, you know, it's just the way we are. We grow like that. That brain is all about survival. So the first stage is survival. And then from 2 to 8, the limbic mind brain, that is the emotional mind. We can call the reptilian mind brain the body mind. It keeps the body functioning, basically. That's the role of the reptilian mind brain, keeps the body in homeostasis. But the limbic mind brain is the emotional mind. So from 2 to about 7 or 8, what we have is the emotional mind. Now, there's no rational mind in the level of the emotional mind. Now, you've got children. I know you have. We talked about this earlier, in this age range. So the emotional mind is dominant during this period. And then I get to the age of about 8, and the rational mind becomes more dominant. Now, the rational mind goes on growing and developing until around the age of 21 or 22. So we don't have a fully functioning mind and brain until we are young adults. This is why teenagers do really stupid things. I mean, you've been a teenager. You've done stupid things. I've been a teenager. Yeah, right. Talk to me about it. Right. That's because we don't have a fully functioning brain. Because so these are the first 3 stages of development. So surviving, conforming, which is the emotional level, and then differentiating, I call the 3rd stage. So what are the needs of each stage? So the first need obviously is survival. So the baby, once it's born, it knows how to suckle in order to get breast milk. It knows how to cry out when it has needs, when it's feeling uncomfortable. And if those needs are actually met, then that baby will grow up trusting this external world to provide for it. If that baby does not get those needs met, it will grow up not trusting the world. And these people eventually become micromanagers because they can't trust the world. Then the young children in 2 to 8 years old, they want to feel a sense of belonging in so they can feel safe. What they're really focused on is feeling safe, and they want to feel belonging. How do they do that? They feel it through love. And so they need love. Now, if they don't get that, or if they're abused, they will learn that the world they live in, they are not good enough to be loved. They are unlovable, and that stays again with them for the rest of their lives. And then in the differentiating stage, it's about recognition. So when you look at young people and the teenagers, you can tell them because they have the latest hairstyle, or they've got tattoos, or they need to be recognized by their peer group. I was walking down the street just today, and I saw a man coming towards me, and he had tattoos and a hairstyle, and I go, yeah, he had a childhood where he wasn't recognized. So now he's put all these adornments in order to be different, so that he can be recognized. And that's the differentiating stage. Now, other children will excel at school in order to be recognized, or other children will want to have the latest gadgets in order to be recognized. So these are the people who focus on money and getting a job and achievement and advancement, because they want to be seen to have the latest car, or the biggest car, or the largest home, and etc. So now let's just stop there and go, what about Donald Trump? Well, he's never got past these stages. because, you know, I studied his values. I read his books and I studied his values. And he's unsafe. He feels unsafe at all of these levels. He doesn't feel recognized, therefore he has to show off. He doesn't feel loved, so he has this perverse relationship with women. As did Einstein. I'm going to say Epstein. and then and he's operating from the survival. So he's got so many fears. He never managed to get to the fourth stage of development, which is the individuating stage, which begins in our mid-20s and goes on till our late 30s. And this is the stage where we let go of the fears that we learned in order to conform and fit in to our world of our parents and our culture. We let go of those fears so that we can now find out who we really are. Now, in a society level, this was the 60s. This was the 60s in Europe and in America and in the UK, where we said, "Fuck it," we're not going to follow. We're not going to follow the culture. We're going to break away. We're going to find out who we are, and and that's been going on ever since. That's called the individuating stage. It doesn't have to be so dramatic as the 60s, but it is an amazing stage of development that you've probably been through, or you're probably going through right now. It's like, I need to have freedom to find out who I am, what I'm good at, and I need that freedom and autonomy to be in the world. So in the 40s, we go into the self-actualizing stage. Now, the self-actualizing stage, having found out what we're good at in the individuating stage, in the self-actualizing stage, we want to find meaning and purpose. Whereas in the individuating stage, we were looking for freedom and autonomy to explore our gifts and talents and let go of the fears that we learned to fit into the culture, remove the mask that we were wearing in order to fit in. In the 40s, we're now exploring fully, deeply who we are at the deepest level, which is the soul level, which is the gifts and talents that we bring. And then in the 50s, we move the integrating stage, which is like, we just want to make a difference. We want to use our gifts and talents to make a difference. But we want to make a difference through the path of empathy. Yeah. I mean, many people say, I want to make a difference, but it's about correcting the wrongs of society or about achievement. But truly making a difference, you have to connect with other people at an empathetic level. That's in the 50s. And in the 60s, it's all about serving. That's where I am. I just had my 75th birthday. And, we just want to give back, or not just give back, but give everything we know to society. And so, I've written 13 books, and I've just reached the stage where I've decided to build an e-learning platform and put everything I've learned on the e-learning platform, and it'll be launched later this year. Right, let's now come back to you. Let's come back to the individuators. Okay, so the individuating stage, roughly from early 20s through to late 30s, roughly, is about finding freedom and autonomy to be who you are. You were brought up by your parents, some very strictly, others not so strictly. Some were brought up in authoritarian regimes, some brought up in democratic regimes. So the more that you were brought up in an authoritarian, the more you have to fit in. So, for example, just look at the young people living in North Korea. My God, they have absolutely no possibility of individuating because it's such an authoritarian regime. Remember the Arab Spring in Egypt and Tunisia? That was all about the individuating stage of development. It was like young people, they'd been abroad, got a great education, they're in their late 20s, they've got top jobs in Egypt for European companies, and they want to individuate. They want the freedom and autonomy to explore who they are. And they hit against the wall of the regime, which is very authoritarian and is not going to allow that to happen because it's a very religious regime. And so the Arab Spring was all about that rebellion, in a sense. Now, I know some of those Egyptian people, and they had to leave because they could not individuate in that worldview, which is currently, what in Egypt actually, and in many Middle Eastern countries. So it's about freedom and autonomy. The second thing is you learn to fit in to your parental and cultural environment, and you learn to you wear a mask in order to fit in. It's not you. It's what it's you find your way and try and fit in because you need to get a job in order to be independent. So you need to fit in. So you're constantly trying to fit in, wearing this mask of, oh, I should do it this way, I should do it that way, but it's not you. You have so the 20s and 30s about removing that mask and going, oh my God, look at me. This is me. I don't have to fit in. I can be fully who I am. So let me give you some examples. Okay. When you were single, you went about and you had a sense of identity, which was you, and you operated in the world to get your needs met. Okay. Let's say you got married and have children. Okay, if you still go around with that same sense of identity, you're not going to be in that marriage for very long, because you have to expand your sense of identity in order to live a family life. So your sense of identity expands to include other people. Now imagine if you go into a relationship and have children, but you don't expand your sense of identity. So even in the family relationship, it's all about you. That's going to be very, not just inconvenient, it's going to be very difficult for everybody. So you expand your sense of identity to include your family. Now, you find a great job in a great company. And so you go in there, and if you still operate from self-interest, you're not going to fit in. Because this environment in this great company is one of, how do we work together? So now you expand your sense of identity even further. And now this is where most of the world's problems come from. I'm living in a nation, and I identify with that nation. So we're now getting to the Brexit issue, okay? So I identify with that nation. I've expanded my sense of identity, and I have a national identity, along with all these other folks, 56 million of them. However, this is not true, because half of these people want to be in the European Union, and they've expanded their sense of identity in order to be European. Well, there's another half of the population that haven't, and these are the people living in fear, basically. And so these are the ones who went Brexit, right? So it was really, and it's the same thing happening in America with Donald Trump. Just more than half the people are living in more fear, and so they vote for Donald Trump because they recognize in Donald Trump their own fears, and they have a certain resonance with him. Mm-hmm. And so the other half of the population who are expanding their sense of identity, who don't have that same resonance with Donald Trump, because they don't have those same levels of fears. So the people with fears resonate with Donald Trump. And the people without those fears are already expanded in consciousness and don't resonate with him, so they won't vote for him. So whoever you vote for is a reflection of where the average level of consciousness is. And so this is why we have Johnson, good old Boris, in charge, because more than half the people in the UK are still more fearful than the other half, who want to expand their sense of consciousness and be in the European Union. And then you can go even further. You can become, I don't want to be in the European, I want to be a citizen of the planet. And then we're going to, no, I go beyond that. I'm a soul having a human experience. I'm just like an expansive sense of identity. So how does that show up? I talk to everybody that I meet. I actually, first, when I married my wife 6 or 7 years ago, she was embarrassed that, in fact, I talked to so many people. Now she isn't. She sees how beautiful it is to sit next to somebody on the bus and talk to them and ask them like questions. Well, how are you today? Oh, what's the best thing in your life today? What are you looking forward to? Just connecting. the guy who delivers our groceries today. I connected with him. I asked him what was going on in his life. And the man who was sweeping the street. You see, we're all souls having a human experience. And as we expand our sense of consciousness, we actually connect with people who are dissimilar to ourselves. Excuse this little publicity thing. One of my best-selling books is What My Soul Told Me. That's the title, What My Soul Told Me. And it actually tells you in there are the 8 steps required to overcome fear. And, the first step is get over the emotion, because, you got upset, you're in emotion. You can't rationally think when you're in emotion because you're in your emotional mind, you're not in your rational mind. Get past the emotion, and then you start to think. And then what I say is you move into the balcony and look at what's happening. So you look at yourself and you say, Richard, I just noticed that you really got upset. So what was the fear that was operating when you got upset? You see, by separating and seeing yourself and saying, I made this situation happen because of some belief that I had. So here's one of the lessons in the book, What My Soul Told Me. And this is one of the things I'm going to be putting in my e-learning classes. Here's one of the lessons. Nobody can upset you. You upset yourself through your beliefs. So what happens is somebody does something which triggers an unmet need you had from childhood, and you react. And you may even, project your unhappiness from your childhood onto the person who triggered you. That person did not upset you. That person triggered you. That's the difference. And you made yourself upset. Now, why is that so? Because you and I can have exactly the same experience and react very differently. You may be triggered and I may not, or I may be triggered and you may not. So we create our reality through our beliefs. So nobody can upset you. They just trigger you. And the pain, the emotional pain you're feeling is your pathway to dealing with it. Because if you don't do anything about it, then you will be triggered again. But the point is, you now begin to do something about it. You begin to, this self-inquiry, this okay, so what was it about this situation? What were my thoughts? What were my feelings? Where in the past when did I first experience these feelings? And of course, it always goes back to childhood. And so you learn this. You become a self-coach, basically. And this is the journey that you have to go on in order to reduce fear in your life. You have to learn to believe in yourself. First thing you have to do, where did the self-doubt come from? Well, it came from your childhood. You weren't born with self-doubt. Nobody's born with self-doubt. It's conditioned into us. And so you have to go back to that and say, well, where did this originate? This is not who I am. And so there are, I've researched this, and there are something called early maladaptive schema. There are 18 of them. And I've identified, well, I didn't identify, somebody else did, but I use them. And they're in my book to say, well, yeah, okay, yeah, that's me. That's the schema that upsets me. And then you begin to say, oh, wow, when did that occur? Yeah, it occurred at this point in my childhood. It's not who I am. It's who I learned to be in order to fit into my environment at that point in time. And I can let go of it now. You see, once you understand it, you can let go of it. But if you just stay absorbed in it, you'll never let go of it. Whatever you fear has power over you. So whenever you fear something, you give your power away because you believe it can control you, right? So do you want to give your power away or not? I don't want to give my power away. I want to be on top of that. So whenever I have a hardship, I say, what's the opportunity? Because throughout life, I've learned, and I've had plenty of opportunities to learn, when something that seemed like a hardship occurred to me, I realized 2 or 3 years later, it was an absolute gift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I learned that. And so that's some wisdom I just want to pass on to everybody. Whenever you've got a hardship, there's always an opportunity, and you may not see it immediately, but you've got to look for it. It's all about connecting with your soul and being your soul. And the way you do that is by not giving in to fear. Never give in to fear. Walk into it.